Welcome to Pastor Andrew's Inspirations. If you enjoy these videos, please click on the red subscribe button below and the bell for more. Welcome to our online church, a congregation made up of many from around the world. No offering is necessary. Subscribing and watching videos will keep us alive under God's watchful eyes. Today we will be learning about part 2 of 8 in our series on biblical names starting with E. Elhanan, son of Jair. Elhanan, son of Jair, or Regim, the Bethlehemite. He is credited with killing Goliath in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 19. That is where he first appears. As this contradicts the better-known story in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in which it is the famous David who kills Goliath, the 4th century BC book of Chronicles explains the second Goliath by saying in chapter 20 verse 5 that Elhanan slew Lami, the brother of Goliath, possibly constructing the name Lami for the last portion of the word Bethlehemite. The King James Bible translators modified 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 18 to 19, to make it read as if David had slain Goliath's brother. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jair or Regim, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, although the Hebrew text at this point makes no mention of the word brother. The medieval Jewish authors of the Targum, Jonathan, solved the same problem by explaining Elhanan as an alternative name for David. However, this makes it difficult to explain why David is called Elhanan in verse 19, but consistently David in the verses that surround it, 15, 16, 17, 21, and 22. The most widely accepted explanation is that the storytellers have displaced the deed from the obscured Elhanan to more famous character David. Eli. Eli was, according to the books of Samuel, a high priest of Israelites in the city of Shiloh, ancient Israel. When Hannah came to Shiloh to pray for a son, Eli initially accused her of drunkenness, but when she protested her innocence, Eli wished her well. Hannah's eventual child, Samuel, was raised by Eli in the tabernacle. When Eli failed to rein in the abusive behavior of his sons, God promised to punish his family, which resulted in the death of Eli and his sons. Later, biblical passages mention the fortunes of several of his descendants, and he figures prominently in Samaritan religious tradition. The story of Hannah, with which the books of Samuel begin, involves Eli. Hannah was the wife of Elkanah. She was childless. Elkanah also had another wife, Peninnah, who bore him children. Peninnah, at every chance, teased and criticized Hannah about her barrenness, to the point of Hannah's deep despair. Their husband, Elkanah, saw Hannah's distress and attempted to discover the cause of her distress by asking Hannah, "Why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" The story indicates that Hannah gave no answer to the questions, and instead rose and presented herself before God. She wept bitterly in the temple of Shiloh. In her despair, Hannah prayed to God for a child and promised that if her prayer is granted, she would dedicate her son to God. When Eli found Hannah in the temple, she was praying silently, with her lips moving. Eli witnessed this unusual behavior and concluded that Hannah was intoxicated. After Hannah's explanation of her sobriety, Eli blessed her with peace and the guarantee that God would grant her request. Hannah went home filled with hope. Subsequently, Hannah became pregnant. Her child was named Samuel. At the time, to offer the yearly sacrifice at the temple, Hannah remained home. She promised to go to the temple when Samuel was weaned and planned to leave him with Eli to be trained as a Nazirite. The sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, meanwhile were behaving wickedly. For example, by taking for themselves all the prime cuts of meat from sacrifices, and by committing adultery with the women who served at the sanctuary entrance. Eli was aware of their behavior, but he rebuked them too lightly and ultimately did not stop them. The sons continued in their sinful behavior, and the man of God prophesied to Eli that Eli and his family would be punished for this, with all male descendants dying before reaching old age, and being placed in positions subservient to prophets from other lineages. The curse alludes to a previous promise from God of Eli's lineage, continuing eternally. Eli being a descendant of Aaron, to whom the promise was initially given in Exodus 28. Similar promises to King David and Jehonadab. While this continuation was not revoked, a curse was placed on all of Eli's male descendants forever. As a sign of the accuracy of his future, Eli was told that his sons would die on the same day. Eli went on to train Samuel. When Samuel heard God speaking to him, he at first mistook God for Eli. Eli, who didn't hear God calling Samuel, eventually realized the truth and instructed Samuel on how to respond. Samuel was told that God's threat would be carried out on Eli and his family. Eli asked Samuel what he had been told, insisting that he be told the whole truth, and so Samuel did. Eli reacted by saying that God will do as he judges best. Some years later, when Samuel was an adult, the Philistines attacked Ebenezer, eventually capturing the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites and killing Eli's sons, who accompanied the Ark to battle as priests. The Israelites had brought the Ark with them to battle under the premise that there was no possible way God would allow it to enter enemy hands. An assumption that proved to be incorrect. Eli, who was nearly blind, was sitting at the front gate to hear the returning soldiers. Return was unaware of the event until he asked about all the commotion in the city. A soldier had returned through the back gate and given the news of the battle to the people. He then told Eli what happened. In reaction to the news that the ark of God had been captured, Eli fell backwards out of the chair and died from a broken neck. He was a judge of Israel for a total of 40 years and died at the age of 98. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant and near the time of delivery. When she heard the news that the ark of God had been captured and that her father-in-law and husband were dead, she went into labor and gave birth, but was overcome by labor pains. As she lay dying, the woman attending her said, "Don't despair, you have given birth to a son." But she did not respond or pay any attention. She names the boy Ichabod, saying the glory has departed from Israel because of the capture of the ark of God and the deaths of her father-in-law and her husband. Eliab. Eliab is a male name held by three different people in the Hebrew Bible, respectively the sons of Hanan, Palu, and Jesse. Only the last is covered in any detail. Eliab, the son of Hanan, was one of the leaders of the tribes of Israel and a prince of the house of Zebulun, according to Numbers chapter 1, verse 9. Eliab was the son of Palu and the father of Nemuel, Dathan, and Abiram of the house of Reuben, according to Numbers chapter 16, verse 1, and Numbers chapter 26, verses 8 to 9. Eliab of Bethlehem, of the tribe of Judah, was the eldest son of Jesse. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 6, and 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 13, and thus the eldest brother of King David. He was apparently tall and had fair features and was the first potential king of Israel, considered for anointing by the prophet Samuel after his disillusion with King Saul. His features resembled those Samuel had first seen in Saul, and Samuel may have considered him a fit successor to Saul. However, God told Samuel that Eliab did not have the proper heart to be king of Israel. Do not consider his appearance or his height. The Lord looks at the heart. Samuel went on to consider each of Eliab's brothers in turn. Some commentators have suggested that Eliab was rejected because of his temper, as he argued with David before David went to fight Goliath, accusing David of pride and insolence. Eliata. Eliata, rendered once as Eliada by the King James Bible, is the name of three individuals in the Hebrew Bible. The son of David, who was originally called Eliada, a Benjamite captain in the time of King Jehoshaphat, and the father of Rezin the Syrian, spelled Eliadah, Eliata, in the King James Version. Aaliyah. Elias is the Greek equivalent of Elijah or Elia, a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel in the 9th century BCE, mentioned in several holy books. Due to Elias's role in the scriptures and to many later associated traditions, the name is used as a personal name in numerous languages. Eliab. Known as David's mighty warriors, also known as David's mighty men, or the Gibberim, Ha-Gibberim, the mighty ones, are a group of 37 men in the Hebrew Bible who fought with King David and are identified in 2 Samuel chapter 23, verses 8 to 38. Part of the supplementary information added to the second book of Samuel in its final 4 chapters. The International Standard Version calls them David's Special Forces. A similar list is given in 1 Chronicles chapter 11 verses 10 to 47, but with several variations and 16 more names. The text divides them into 3, of which there are 3, and 30, of which there are more than 30. The text explicitly states that there are 37 individuals in all, but it is unclear whether this refers to the 30, which may or may not contain the 3, or the combined total of both groups. The text refers to the 3 and the 30 as though they were both important entities, and not just an arbitrary list of 3 or 30 plus significant men. Some scholars regard the passages referring to 3 and the 30 as having come from either a source distinct to the main sources in the books of Samuel, or being otherwise out of place, since parts of the text have distinct stylistic differences from other portions, appearing as a list, as a series of character introductions, or as a flowing narrative. Some suspect that the passages may themselves be compiled from multiple source documents, further as 2 Samuel chapter 23 verses 23 and 24 reads, David put him in command of his bodyguard, Asahel, brother of Job. Among the 30 were. The text is regarded as corrupted, and the middle of chapter 23 verse 24, between the words Job and among, is generally presumed to have been lost. Some translations move among the 30 were to be before Asahel, which smooths over the issue. Eliam ben Ahitophel, the Gilonite, was the son of Ahitophel from Gilo, and one of David's mighty warriors. Elias is the Greek equivalent to Elijah, a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel in the 9th century BCE, mentioned in several holy books. And as previously mentioned, due to Elias's role in the scriptures and to many later associated traditions, the name is used as a personal name in numerous languages. Eliashib, or Eliashib, the high priest, is mentioned in Nehemiah chapters 12 verses 10 and 22, and 3 verse 1, and verses 20 to 21, and chapter 13 verse 28, and possibly the book of Ezra of the Hebrew Bible, as the grandfather in Nehemiah chapter 12 verses 22 of the high priest Johanan, in Ezra chapter 10 verse 6. Some also place him in different parts of Nehemiah, including chapter 12 verse 23 and chapter 13 verses 4 and 7. But this is disputed. Nehemiah chapter 3 verses 20 and 21 places his home between the area of 2 working groups constructing the walls of Jerusalem. On the south side of the city, he helped with the refortification of this wall. In Nehemiah chapter 3 verse 1, the size of his house indicated his wealth and high socio-economic status in Nehemiah chapter 3 verses 21 to 23. This places him as someone who lived during the time of Nehemiah, in the year 445 BCE. Eliashib was the high priest when Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem in the 20th year of Artaxerxes I, in Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 1 and chapter 2 verse 1. Josephus puts Eliashib as a contemporary of Ezra during the reign of Xerxes. He also dates his reign as high priest through the reign of Cyrus the Younger, who Josephus mentions is also called by the Greeks Artaxerxes. Josephus outlines this story in Antique, chapter 11, verse 185 and verse 297. The last quotation of the story states, when Eliashib, the high priest, was dead, his son Judas succeeded in the high priesthood. Eliashib's grandson was married to a relative of Sanballat, the Heroinite, in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 28. And while Nehemiah was absent in Babylon, Eliashib had leased the storerooms of the second temple to Sanballat's associate Tobiah the Ammonite. When Nehemiah returned, he threw Tobias's furniture out of the temple and drove out Eliashib's grandson, in Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 4 to 9. According to David Kimye, this is the political background to the allegorical vision of Satan, the angel of the Lord, and Eliashib's possibly deceased grandfather, Joshua the high priest, in Zechariah chapter 3. Eliatha. Eliatha is the name given in 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verse 4, to one of the 14 sons of Hanan. According to chapter 25, verse 27, he gave his name to one of the 24 classes of temple singers. Eliad. Eliad was a prince of the tribe of Benjamin, one of those appointed by Moses to superintend the division of Canaan amongst the tribe, in Numbers chapter 34, verse 21. Eline, one of the 9 sons of Shimei, appears in the genealogical passage as a descendant of Benjamin in 1 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 20. The consonants which make up the Hebrew name are only in this one passage read as Eline. Elsewhere, the pronunciation is Elione. Elizar. Elizar was the name of at least 3 different individuals in the Bible. Eliezer of Damascus was, according to the Targums, the son of Nimrod. Eliezer was head of the patriarch Abraham's household, as mentioned in the book of Genesis, chapter 15, verse 2. And Abram said, "My Lord Hashem Elohim, what can you give me, seeing that I go childless? And the steward of my house is the Damascene Eliezer." Lekreka. Medieval biblical exegetes have explained the noun ben mesik as meaning butler, steward, overseer, while the name Demasek Eliezer is explained by Targum Onkelos as meaning Elizar the Damascene. Others say that he was given the name Damascus by Abraham, who purchased Elizar from Nimrod and had passed through the city of Damascus while returning with his servant from Babylonia. Other translations of Genesis describe Eliezer as Abraham's heir. There is an interpretation in Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 43, verse 2, cited by Rashi, that Eliezer went alone with Abraham to rescue Lot, with the reference to his initiates, stated to be 318 in number, in Genesis chapter 14, verse 14. Being the numerical value of Eliezer's name in Hebrew, interpreted in Tractate Nedarim 32a as Abraham not wishing to rely on a miracle by taking only one individual. According to most interpretations, the unnamed servant, the elder of Abraham's house, that ruled over all that he had, Genesis chapter 24, verse 2, who obtained Rebekah as a bride for Isaac, was the same Elizar. This name is first found in the Bible in Genesis chapter 15, verse 2, when Abraham asked God about his promises of a son while being childless, naming Elizar being the current heir of his house. Elizar was Moses and Zipporah's second son. His name means help of my God. In Hebrew, the verse in the book of Exodus, chapter 18, verse 4 states, "The name of the other son was Eliezer, because my father's God, Elohe Avi, was my helper, Bezeri, rescuing me from Pharaoh's sword." Both Gershom and Eliezer were born during the time Moses had taken refuge in Midian and had married Jethro's daughter Zipporah. The prophet called Eliezer son of Dodava, rebuked King Jehoshaphat for aligning himself with Ahijah, the king of Israel. He and Ahijah built ships in Ezion-Geber, which were to sail to Tarshish for trade, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 37. The ships sank due to his not relying on the Lord. Eliezer, son of Dodavahu of Marashath, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, "Because you have made an alliance with Ahijah, the Lord will destroy what you have made." The ships were wrecked and were not able to set sail to trade. Elihoreph. Elihoreph was a scribe in King Solomon's court. He was a son of Shisha and brother of Ahiah. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 3. The name means my God repays, or my God is the giver of the autumn harvest. Elihu. Elihu is a critic of Job and his three friends in the Hebrew Bible book of Job. He is said to have been the son of Barashel and a descendant of Buz, who may have been from the line of Abraham. Genesis chapter 22, verses 20 to 21, mentions Buz as a nephew of Abraham. Elihu is introduced in Job chapter 32, verse 2, towards the end of the book. His speeches comprise chapters 32 to 37. And he opens his discourse with more modesty than displayed by the other comforters. Elihu addresses Job by name in Job chapter 33, verse 1, 33, verse 31, and 37, and chapter 37, verse 14. And his words differ from those of the three friends in that his monologues discuss divine providence, which he insists is full of wisdom and mercy. The narrators preface Job chapter 32, verses 4 to 5, and Elihu's own words in Job chapter 32, verse 11, indicate that he has been listening intently to the conversation between Job and the other three men. He also admits his status as one who is not an elder in chapter 32, verses 6 and 7. As Elihu's monologue reveals, his anger against the three older men was so strong that he could not contain himself. In chapter 32, verses 2 to 4, an angry young man, he is critical of both Job and his friends. I have words for a reply to you and your friends as well. Andrew Davidson argues that the friends or companions in this verse are not his three friends, Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar, but most probably Job is considered here the center of a circle of persons who cherished the same irreligious doubts in regard to God's providence as he did. Elihu claims that the righteous have their share of prosperity in this life, no less than the wicked. He teaches that God is supreme and that one must acknowledge and submit to that supremacy because of God's wisdom. He draws instances of benignity from, for example, the constant wonders of creation and of the seasons. Elihu's speech is finished abruptly, and he disappears without a trace at the end of chapter 37. This is part 2 of the biblical names starting with E. Please stay with us for part 3. If you enjoy these videos, please click on the button below and the bell for more. Adonai Nisi, the Lord is our banner. God's blessings be upon us all.